about Hindemith that struck me too was, first of all, the Requiem, that When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Bloomed. And I had a recording of that, and I probably don't have it anymore, but I'd like to hear it again. As I said, I can't remember if I actually heard him conduct that or not, but I'm pretty sure I heard a performance. And it does mention in the book that it was performed in New York in 1963. And that's when I graduated from Manhattan School of Music that year. And I know I saw a lot of stuff in New York during that whole time I was in college there. But the thing about Hindemith was, get some information about him from that book, is that in that time period, like between 59 and 63, and I don't know how much before, but definitely during that time period, the school that I went to, and I have no idea what, I think Juilliard might have been similar, Mannes might have been similar, I'm not totally sure. I would guess that they were pretty similar. Is that there was a kind of there was a conservative and a experimental kind of a dichotomy going on. There was this polemical war going on, probably a residual of just the Schoenberg-Stravinsky polarity, which is really one of the main polarity in the 20th century, really musically. It's that polarity. It's got a lot of subcategories, but let's say, okay, you've got the Schoenberg and the Stravinsky schools in a way.
And as a young composer, would you feel compelled to have to move one direction or the other?
Yeah, I think so. I stayed pretty aloof from all that, and I think it was just because of just personality, just no special gifting or special insight or anything. It was just the way I approach things, which I just got from my own experience with my dad and my mom and their music in the house, and how I grew up in music and what my personality was like. I was really too kind of ferociously independent to make any definite decision about belonging to a certain school. But I was at least, well, I guess to some extent I was, because I totally rejected the conservative political platform that was being thrown at me by my teachers there.
Gotcha.
It's pretty shocking to think of it now, because as you mentioned from your background too, I mean it was you know, composition later, like serial music was in.
Correct.
Whereas at that time, I was told point blank by my teachers that the whole Schoenberg school was just like nothing.
It's all
it's just all
distraction from serious music.
Singers can't sing that music. Listeners don't want to hear it. There's no the usual kind of that I heard that, and I also heard that, strangely enough too, that Stravinsky was like very minor composer, not to be you know, there's nothing there but ostinatos. I mean, these are really excellent trained musicians.
Oh, these are trained with lots of
Vittorio
things
Giannini,
right.
Nicholas Flagello, Ludmila Ulela, all three have passed away now, but Ludmila passed away most recently of the three of them. And I was told point blank that you know, the Symphony of Psalms would be the only piece that we were going to analyze in analysis. And the fugue in the second movement was really very poor. We were going to point out how poor that fugue was. And I promptly got myself a private teacher.
Aha!
I mean, at the age of 18, I was like crazy. So I got myself a private teacher. I knew who I was going to get. And I did make an identification with that side of things. I was known as the guy who likes all that music. But the people who were composing more conservative music at that time, say that, you know, just accepting that definition of those polarities, they were writing in a very, very Hindemithian style.
Interesting.
There were lots of pieces I heard, lots of graduation pieces that I heard in the 4 years I was there. You know, every year they would have performances of composers who were graduating.
Okay.
So we'd go hear it, and many of the pieces were very Hindemith oriented. So he was kind of a model for that conservative kind of thing in New York at that time. On the other hand, you can see it in the book too, that he was really chafing at all of this negative criticism. He was totally out of fashion. Especially after Schoenberg died, because when Schoenberg died, naturally, everybody started to consider him more seriously. And Stravinsky turned in that direction, began to write some 12-tone pieces and whatnot. So you know, Bartók and Prokofiev were the two composers who were presented to me as the only legitimate 20th century composers worth taking seriously. Major composers, you know, certainly Benjamin Britten and people like that too. But Bartók and Prokofiev, that was it, man. And I was furious with that, because I already gotten through liking all that Schoenberg, Weber, and Berg music from high school.
Gotcha.
And I liked all that music. It was just like very attractive to me to hear all the new sounds. And there was, those three guys really were, they were very fine musicians. So they took that idiom and they shaped it, and they had beautiful concepts in their compositional way of doing it. It just registered. I heard it and I liked it.
So how did you sort of, I mean, with your professors sort of poo-pooing some of that, yet you were attracted to it, how did you get that to work for your own composition, work with them?
Well, I wrote a graduation piece that was very strange for them. I wish I destroyed it, unfortunately. I should have kept
Oh,
it.
right.
Terrible. Yeah, and it was just, I was able to kind of get through the 4 years without creating any disruption in my schooling at all.
Good.
But I kept a lot of it private, what I did. Everybody knew that I liked all that music, and that I was, following that trail. But I kept low profile there, so I didn't like make enemies or anything. I loved it. I loved being a composition major in college. It was a fantastic. If I could have stayed there forever, I would have. If I didn't have to deal with the real world after that, I would have been thrilled. But I had another sort of educational enterprise going on while I was in college.
Okay.
And that actually lasted all the way up until I was 30 years old. This was like an intensely, between 15 and 30, everything that I really have today came from that period. I mean, the maturity and the growth came after that, but I was that's all I lived for. I did not live for anything else. So I went kind of nuts during that time. That was my thing. So I found there was a composer at the Manhattan School of Music. His name was M. William Carlins, Bill Carlins, and he was getting a master's degree at the same time that I was there getting a bachelor's. And I knew several of the graduate students that were in composition there. Another fellow named Howard Rovix. Now I knew that these guys were sympathetic to very modern music, so I gravitated towards them, and I hung out with them in the cafeteria and all that. Well, when Ludmila Ulela told me that Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms was a poor piece, and she was going to prove how poor it was by analyzing it in class. Not only that, but I wasn't there was no reason for me to think about it until my third year, because that's when we were going to deal with it. Well, so I didn't want to deal with it my third year.
Right, you're ready.
I had seen a live performance of the Symphony of Psalms at the New York Philharmonic with Leonard Bernstein conducting. That was my introduction to Stravinsky's neoclassical music. I was like on cloud nine. I couldn't believe it. I mean, just looking at the stage, 2 pianos, no first and second violins, if I remember correctly. No high strings anyway, 2 pianos instead. Then violas and cellos. The conductor then in front of the pianos, and then behind it, a chorus. I mean, just the first visual was like, whoa, unbelievable. And the piece was it just transported me, the piece. So to hear her say that this was a poor piece in her opinion, and Ludmila was great. I loved her.
Right.
We had a wonderful time. She was a wonderful teacher. But there was this issue. It was a historical issue. Mm-hmm. That's what was going on at that time in New York. So if anybody was interested in serial music or God forbid, John Cage, oh man, that was like, the devil incarnate. So, or for instance, Stefan Volpe was very active in New York. Now he's become a kind of an institution of his own these days, certainly not a household word, but he's well known as a 20th century figure now. And he was active in New York, that was his prime period. The 60s were the best period for Stefan Volpe. So people were going to Stefan's house, not to study all the time, but he would have these get-togethers. And they would go and he would talk and they would listen to music and all that, so it was kind of a little scene there. And I knew these guys were involved in that, so I went to Bill Carlins and I said, look, I want to study traditional harmony with somebody privately. I don't think it's enough here. I wasn't happy with the theory I was getting. I wanted more. He said, well, I'll take you through the Hindemith Traditional Harmony book. And I said, well, that's great, because I knew that book, and it's still the one I use. I made my own version of it for beginners. But I said, I want to write some serial pieces. And I want to write them with you, and I want to analyze some music. Let's analyze some Stravinsky. I want to do Varese. And he said, well, yeah, sure. He lived in Brooklyn. He was formerly a lawyer. He stopped being a lawyer in order to go back to school to become a composer. He got a PhD and wound up at Northwestern University until he retired. Just several years ago, he passed away. So I studied with him. Years later, he told me, he says, Ron, you were my first private composition student. Oh my God, I thought that was great. I would go down to his house, and I wrote 3 serial pieces with him. I was so glad I got to write those pieces with him, because his approach was very different. He didn't write serial pieces the whole time either, but I started with a piece that wrote with a 5-note row. Then the second piece I did it was an 8-note row. Then the last piece I did was a full chromatic 12-tone row. And each piece was different. The first piece was a piece for flute and clarinet and percussion. The second piece was a string trio. I did a string trio in 2 movements. And then the final piece was a kind of a sextet, which was a little piano concerto thing with piano and 5 instruments. So that was it. I never wrote any serial music after that, but the process of studying that with him, who was not mathematical, it was not intellectual in the sense of, the way some of it got to be later. It wasn't combinatorial or, set theory or any of that. It was very, very deeply musical. So I really had a wonderful time with Bill doing that.